I think the other thing to think about is that we're still very early. We're still very, very early. So, regardless of what you hear about in the mainstream media or even in the non mainstream media, it's still extremely early. This business is going to develop over the next 100 years.
Welcome, everybody, to our show today. This is the Reinventing Energy and Money podcast with Abundant Minds. We've got Brad James today. And Brad is an entrepreneur with 10 years plus of consulting experience, a track record of building successful companies of his own across several industries. He's deeply involved in the Bitcoin mining space, owning a mining, hosting, and consulting company called Mining with Brad. I was first exposed to Brad through his Build a Mine bootcamp, which was early in 2022, and I credit the support from he and his team with the success that Abundant Minds is having today. Brad has such a diverse background that spans across multiple different industries. He's worked in traditional finance, content creation, coaching, and my favorite, aside from Bitcoin mining, sustainable beekeeping. So, Brad, we're excited for you to join us. It's really exciting to get to learn from you on what steps we can take to be professionals in the Bitcoin mining industry, our mental frameworks, and whatever path that we can take to be successful in this industry. So, Brad, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Bo, man. It's good to talk to you. I mean, we do this often enough, but this will be a little bit different than what we usually do.
Definitely. Now the world gets to be exposed to the same value that I've had for the last couple of years. So we'll start off. Brad, you have had, I dare say, a profound personal impact and professional impact on me. I consider you a friend, even an older brother at times. And I'm wondering if you could start us off talking about what it means to you to get to teach and coach new entrants in the Bitcoin mining space to be successful in their business.
That's a really good question, Bo. And I haven't thought about that specifically, but I guess what I will say is that there's always been something. I love teaching because I'm willing to make all the mistakes and go out there and be a pioneer and come back with a bunch of arrows in my back and go, don't go down that path because you're going to end up like me. And I think with, especially in the Bitcoin mining space, there's so much opportunity for people to finally get a step up, especially with people who've been trying entrepreneurship. They've been trying to figure it out. They're trying to get to financial freedom. And part of it comes down to they just have to take a breath and be intentional about the path that they go. And my hope is that just like with you and me, we talk more about what not to do sometimes than what to do. And now it's beginning to evolve to what to do based on best practices. And that's the really cool part, I think, about where you're at and where the industry is as a whole right now. But I just love helping other people. I think I get hit over the head all the time by one of my advisors specifically. Is like, stop giving away all the good stuff. And I go, why? It's just information. They just have to go execute on it now. He's like, yes, but this isn't like the info product business where everything's out there to find. There actually isn't a lot of information available for people yet. And I was like, fair point, but I'm still going to share. So I love just being able to see people grow and finally hit some of their dreams and milestones along the way, because that, I don't know what it is, but like I get chills thinking about it. You know, as you were reading that, I was like, man, Bo, tell you, it's not the value, it's all the mistakes. That's all I'm doing. I'm saying, just don't do this. If you do this, you're going to get hurt. That's it. I don't know if that answers your question, but hopefully it does.
I'm curious, do you feel like your personality compels you to just lead with value before anybody offers to pay you or give you service just because you want to help?
Oh, absolutely, man. Like that, my hope always with doing any of the work that I do, and this comes through with the Build a Mine, right? Like everybody goes, Brad, you should charge way more for it. And I'm like, no, the point is to get people in so they can understand what it is first before they make the leap. And if that costs $100, then it costs $100. That's worthwhile for that week, because we end up filtering out, there's probably about 30% of people who go through that who are like, nope, not for me anymore, which is good because now we're saving them the pain, the hassle, and everything else by doing that. So I feel that if you can put the value out there right away, at least to some extent, right? Like there's way more depth we could go into in that Build a Mine, but it's meant to be a crash course. And so I try to shape the value in a way that we understand who's coming in and then give them what they need to make decisions before they take the next step. And then in the next step, hey, great. I mean, you heard me talk about this all the time, Bo. It's like, look what I'm doing for this week for you guys. Now imagine what we can do if we both commit the time and the effort and the resources to make more happen. That's when people go, yep, it's worth it. Let's move forward. And that's why I try to just put it out there, right? Between this, doing the spaces right now on X, doing some of the conference stuff, all of that is about how do you jam as much value into it so people can make the best decision for them. And then along the way, now people like you, Bo, you put in the time, the effort, you followed the process, you went through the hurdles, you did the work, but that's because you got, hopefully in 5 days or 6 days worth of time, like the first chapter of the book going, yep, I'm interested in reading this book further. Now let's put in the time and the effort.
Right. You mentioned it's different than other information businesses, right? This is still a very early industry. There's still a lot to uncover that's not on a Yahoo Answers forum or Quora or anything like that, because there's just it's still too early for there to be huge databases of how to get into Bitcoin mining as a business. But you also mentioned, and I think this is true, you can give away a lot of information for free to people. And still, there is so much value in having someone alongside you for the implementation. Because I went through your Build a Mine program, and it wasn't like I came out and I felt like I could do it alone. The coaching, the support, the ongoing connection with the community, there's so much value in having people alongside you, and especially someone like you or others who charge for their services to help accelerate you to whatever this goal is. You can often achieve anything that you want on your own, but there is a lot of value in paying to, I'm not going to say cheat, but speed up your process.
Yeah, I mean, they're cheat codes, but that's where I think just in general with information on the internet, right? You can go find anything. The challenge is with the internet, that also means anybody can put anything on there, right? And so to me, I think especially in this industry, when I got into mining in 2016 with a mentor of mine, we didn't know what we were doing, right? Like, and there wasn't anything online. You go to the big sites and they'd be like, yeah, here's your miner, here's how you plug it in, here's how you configure it. And you're like, great, but this thing creates so much heat. And they didn't have the repair forums, they didn't have any of that. You just had to figure it out. Like now you can go in, for example, and look at a kernel log, and you can go and figure out what are the errors telling you so that you can actually put it down the right path to repair it, or during that diagnostic to go, yep, it's a board thing, we got to send it out or repair it, or it's just, hey, change out the fans. That's all there now. And even then, when you're looking at some of the forums with the new equipment, that doesn't necessarily mean it's the right information, because somebody's putting it out there on the internet and they're going, well, it worked for me. But they haven't done it 1,000 times to go, yep, this is what it is all the time. And that's where even I compare it kind of to like what's happening right now with engineering and AI. So there's some really good like AI bots out there, but those AI bots don't necessarily have the case studies or the all the stats in the back end, however, whatever that model is, to be able to tell you all the time, this is exactly what the answer needs to be, so that 99.9% of the time it works. And I think with mining and where we are at right now, you almost have to have somebody along with you to go, hey, this is how you need to do this thing at least. Here's the foundation. Because if you don't have that, you're going to build a floor that there's going to be potholes and sinkholes in that are going to fall through the bottom. And if you're going through this, that's not hundreds of dollars or even thousands of dollars sometimes. That's literally hundreds of thousands of dollars if you go down that path and don't have somebody there to be like, what do you think? Like, what's your thought on this? We're thinking this. Have you seen this before? What are others doing that you know of? Who are you speaking to? Like, who's in your network we could talk to? I mean, all of those things are super important. Remember we had on the gentleman who just did filters? Were you on that call? And all of a sudden I learned all about MERV rating and changing them out and pressure gauges and understanding when to change things out and why it causes a drop, which is now why your fans are breaking on the miners and why your exhaust fans now have negative pressure. And how just that one little thing just on the filters, not even airflow, just filters, can cause a whole ripple effect if you're not taking care of it, and cause basically a cascading effect of issues across a small batch or rack of miners. I mean, that's invaluable because you could have just potentially saved hours and hours of time of having to change the fans on the miners, and then hours and hours and hours and probably tens of thousands to change fan motors depending on how your fans are working. That, just having that person and being able to go, hey, let's talk to him, let's see what he says. And he goes, oh, your MERV ratings are too high. That's why you're getting all these fan issues breaking down. I mean, that's a little detail that most people don't think of. But in an industry where it is literally just about math, process, and details, that's invaluable because you probably save yourself hundreds of thousands of dollars just on that one rack. So that's just where I look at it, like with information in general, because you're actually dealing with physical hardware, right? And it's not just digital where it's a website where in marketing, you can spin things up within a day and then tear things down and fix them within the next 6 hours. In physical structures, you can't do that, right? And we as miners move 10 times faster than any other construction industry. And you know this from doing all the development work. And you look at it and you go, if we brought in an architect or an engineer, how many of these things would they be like, that's not supposed to work, but somehow you're making it work?
You talk about it's the little pieces of information that can often save you thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars, and I'm squarely in that camp, right? I came into your world months after a totally avoidable mistake that was on the order of $500,000, right? And it was a couple of small things along the line that, had they been controlled for, had someone been alongside me watching, they might have seen that little snippet. And the context of this conversation for me as well is, I want to bring value to entrepreneurs and investors who are getting in the space, and you often want to shortcut those very costly mistakes.
Yes.
Is there anything in particular that sticks out in your mind that is hey, don't go here, or you should definitely do this? And one thing that we talked about was relationships. You've often said who, not how. So maybe you can go a little deeper into that potentially.
Yeah, I think, the shortcut or that cheat code that you're talking about, even if you're just managing a fleet and you're trying to figure out co-location, right? Like in the last couple of weeks, Bo, we've gotten a ton of calls about, hey, do you have capacity? Can we place this stuff? And my answer to all of them always is, before we even go down the co-location path or running these miners, let's do some mining economics. And as an example, right, of that avoidable thing. And so for them, it's, hey, let's go through the people sometimes, and this is very telling when dealing with people. And for me, it's kind of a filtration piece, where what I have found in this industry is people who just want to go fast for the sake of going fast tend to be very, very, they have a high resolve. And as they're working with you, their expectations are going to be totally off of what you actually spoke about, because they're just worried about things being up without understanding why things break. So in this industry, that's where, like, even with the co-location miners, I go, look, let's do some mining economics. Come to this workshop, right? Do this workshop first, figure out if those miners are actually profitable for you, so that you don't get locked into a 3-year contract. And for the first year, while we're dealing with post-halving environment, you're trying to determine, how am I going to pay for my monthly bill? And it's the same thing. And they go, well, who does that? And I go, well, luckily, enter the ecosystem. We've got Nico Smeed, we've got the team at DMG Blockchain, we've got all of these people who are willing to share that knowledge as well, and go, just make sure you're dotting your I's and crossing your T's on this front and checking the numbers, so at least you understand what the expectations are. So that's the who, because I'm not a mining economist, right? I don't think you're a mining economist, or I don't know if
that's not
gets you going in the morning. Yeah. I would rather have somebody sit down and go, great, what is the equipment you're working with? Let's drop it into the tools we've built. We know these tools work because we've ran it for our own fleet. And let's determine what you're actually going to have to deal with. It's the same thing with building the equipment. We talked about the filter guy. It's the same reason why I go, your master electrician will become your best friend. right? And the people who are like, oh, I need to figure out the electrical. And at some point during that process, they end up with a ton of bills from electrical engineers. They don't have a master electrician going, hey, I can actually go do this. And they've just dropped 20 or 30,000 just on electrical drawings, and they can't deploy them. And guess what? Now that they're waiting because they're doing it a little bit backwards, because they didn't figure out the who of how to actually deploy and execute on those instructions. Now that building is gone because somebody came in and snatched it up, and they're on to the next one, right? Or all of a sudden they have a batch of miners that are down and they don't know how to fix it because they didn't go through any of the miner trainings to actually do the repairs. And they get into the miner training, they go, oh, I only did the board repair, I didn't do chip repair. So it's a totally different level of expertise. Like this morning I had that conversation. I go, why are you trying to figure out how to repair this one miner? Well, because everybody's backed up and it's going to take 2 months. And I go, yeah. And do you have the time to learn how to do it and deal with all the failing of the cost of failing it and potentially breaking a board and potentially ruining the $10,000 piece of gear that you invested in? Or are you willing to take a little bit of time, work with that person, because they're going to ask you about supply chain. So you better go find out who has parts and components for them. That will help expedite it. But because this is an industry of so many different facets and expertise, computer science, computer hardware, network IT, climate control, electrical, supply chain, HR, right? When you're running a major site, finance, business, like there are too many things for one person to do. And I think I learned that in running that first at scale facility that we started building in 2017, where I actually had to do almost everything except for the electrical. Otherwise, everything was me. We had an HVAC guy who supplied equipment, but he didn't know how it was supposed to work. We had an electrician who had to learn along the way, and he was phenomenal. And that's where I began to learn. He becomes my best friend because most of the time I was trying to solve for minor issues when in fact it was electrical issues because we were in an old building and I didn't know how this stuff, right? And Bo, maybe you've seen this. Do you ever, probably not. I call it phantom electrical, where the miners just keep going through this churn of turning on and rolling off and then turning on. And you're like trying to figure out why only half of them are working and spinning up. It wasn't until I learned from my electrician, he's like, oh yeah, that's a fuse broken in the bus bar. And I was like, what? He's like, yeah, sometimes fuses break and you're running massive amounts of power that could run a small little village. What do you think's going to happen? This one little fuse that's 6 inches long and the size of a toilet paper, tube. Of course it's going to break down because you're running how many kilowatts through that thing in one day? It's going to break every once in a while. And that's where if I didn't have a who, I'd still be there trying to figure out what the heck is wrong with my miners rather than trying to figure out what's wrong with the electrical system that we deployed. I mean, does that make sense? I mean, have you dealt with that?
Absolutely. And I think you touched on a really important nuance, which is you've got to plan well. You've got to have a good team around you. You have to have, strong professionals in electrical, HVAC, networking, whatever it may be that's going into your mind.
Mm-hmm.
But something that I think is lost very often is you still have to train these people because none of them are likely a full-time electrician or HVAC professional for a Bitcoin mine, right?
Yeah.
And that's
they're all old school guys because they're blue collar and they work in houses, they work in old factories, they work in, they're building commercial projects, and they're like, yeah, we're used to just got a building, run the cable, make sure it's balanced, they plug in, we're good to go.
Even the most, I thought I got a great electrician on my first try because he came from building the Facebook data center not far from town. And so I thought, Data center electrician, he's going to know exactly what I need, right? And that's such a fallacy, right? I've had to teach him for hours and hours and hours because many of the things that they are used to building cost this much. And what you need actually costs this much,
This much. Yep.
It's a very wide gap between what is needed in almost any other industry and what we know is the necessity for a mine. So maybe you could talk a little bit about the nuances of that. Have you had to train people who come to you from other professions quite a bit?
Very much so. even people in IT and network architecture, right? So the first facility, like we figured out all the IT on our own, and it didn't work, right? It didn't work well. We ended up paying way more on the back end to replace switches. We had to rerun Ethernet because we didn't realize we failed to use shielded Ethernet to run hundreds of feet. Didn't realize we needed to add a jumper in there at one, like so many things that we just learned. And we had to learn it that first time because nobody knew what they were doing with this stuff, right? Like that was the trick. Locally, there was nobody who had any expertise in how do you retrofit a building to turn it into a tier 0 data center that was not going to have packet loss, and you weren't worried about 90% download speed from your ISP. You were worried about 50 download, 50 upload, right? 50% each way. And it's unheard of because you're dealing with the local IT guys who back when you talk to them, they're like, yeah, I did the punch card programming. And I was like, that's cool. Maybe sometime we can have that conversation, over a coffee or a drink. But they were taking this old school approach, like your data center guy who did the Facebook stuff. And he's like, well, this is probably how it has to be done because this is what they tell us to do. And finally, then, once we got into the fourth build out of that, in that entity, we just began to figure out, okay, I said, I'm going to invest in somebody who's going to actually help us design the network architecture correctly and do it from a standpoint of wanting to understand why it needs to work that way rather than this is just the way we've always done it, right? Michael Rampolla, you've heard him say Titwati, right? That's the way we've always done it. And I just say poor Titwati because Titwati has no place in this industry. And I look at it and I go, okay, when the guy showed up from Cisco and we had this conversation and we talked through it and he looked at how we had designed it, that's where the first light bulb went on. He's like, you built a network architecture. It's not supposed to work, but somehow, Brad, it's working. And that's where all of a sudden he's like, I'm going to call you MacGyver. I was like, cool, I'll take it. But then in the next iteration, I was like, the investment made it so much easier, right? In finding somebody who, one, was hungry to learn how everything worked, two, had high quality character, was trying to find us the best solution that also hit all of the parameters. They weren't just trying to sell a system, right? So they had high character, they wanted it to work, and it was fun for them, right? And then three, they were coachable. So like even after the deployment, for literally a year and a half, they wanted to follow up and learn how it was working. They'd go through the logs with us on the network side. They'd troubleshoot with me. And that was just part of the deal. But it also was very informative for him because he really wanted to understand. And he helped us out with a couple other deployments after that. And every other deployment went super easy just because he was willing to take the time to figure it out. And he was willing to be coached because he didn't know how miners were. He actually went out and bought equipment, ran it home. He was one of those home miners for a little bit. And now when we come across any of these IT professionals, for example, who come from like office IT or home IT or any of these other things, that's like some of my question. I go, if you had this project in front of you, what would be your first step in figuring out how to create the deployment? And they go, well, the ones who click with me are the ones who just begin asking questions about what it is, what I know. The ones who go, well, here's our solution. I go, you don't even know what the heck it is we're building and what's important. And it's very telling to me to be able to filter out some of those individuals. And some of them end up coming back because they go, well, why did we win? Because they may have even had a lower price point. But I go, because you weren't curious. And unfortunately, this industry, I promise you, the solution you deploy, even if we go through this process, it's going to break at some point. And we're not going to know why it's breaking. And you're going to be the one on the hook to help us figure it out. And if you're not curious now, how are you going to be curious enough to try and understand, great, you've got 6,000 nodes running on this network, and you've also got management software, and you've got climate monitoring software, and you have power management software, and all of this stuff, and you follow the specs that we looked at for all of those things, and all of a sudden one of those things break, and you don't ask the question, well, why don't we just pick up the phone and call that person, the entity that's providing it, to ask some questions? which then leads you to understand that just because the specs say what they're supposed to be on their website doesn't mean that's actually the specs that actually will get you the results you want. And so curiosity and being willing to own the fact that you were wrong, and it wasn't really anybody's fault because you were basing it off of your story and what you know. It's just you have to be willing to fail and then own the failure so that the next time you deploy, you're like, yep, we learned it this way. So now I've got tiers, right? So all of these tools, you got this size, we know what's going to work here. But then if you get bigger, you're going to have to scale up to the big boy or the next big boy, right? And I think so many professionals are used to twatty. That's the way we've always done it for this, that they don't, unless they're curious, it's not going to work out. It's just not going to work unless they're willing to adjust that thinking. Does that make sense?
I think curiosity is definitely what sets the successful operators apart from the people who get frustrated and quit. And in any field, right? Curiosity sets the 1% apart from the 99%. Is that you were continually looking for more answers to figure out how you can do it better.
Yeah, I mean, that's you. That's what you've been doing this whole time. I mean, every time we hop on a call, you're like, hey, I'm dealing with this thing. What do you think? I mean, doing that whole, just being willing to ask the question and look foolish, right? Like, I think you were probably a good student growing up, right? I would imagine.
Depends on how you define good student. I enjoyed learning about what I wanted to learn about.
Did you get good grades though? Like, you seem like somebody who got decent grades.
I graduated without failing out from an engineering school, so that's a success. But I didn't show up to class very much, so I can't say that I was a great student. And it was because I wanted to spend time doing something like this. I was really very entrepreneurial. I could not stand sitting in a room where I was learning something that I did not know if I was going to apply or not. Right. So, but I resonate really strongly with the MacGyver image that you painted of yourself early on. And that's how many of us get into it. And that's kind of it's the joy, but it's also the limiter. And so in the context of becoming a professional miner, I'm curious, MacGyver is kind of one mindset that we have early on, but what do you think sets apart the people that get into this and truly become professionals, whether it's as an entrepreneur or an investor, that the professionals are set apart from the amateurs in this space?
Systems and process, right? Like, once you're through the problem solving aspect of it, figuring out, great, it broke, how to fix it, which is very reactionary, and flipping to, okay, how do I be proactive on this, and layer in the systems that we know work or automations we know work. That's the difference between, I think, the dabblers and probably a lot of plebs who are willing to do that because they like to tinker, right? When you're a tinkerer, that's your creative outlet. And if that's your creative outlet to tinker, to figure it out, to play around with it, you're okay when things break because somewhere in your subconscious, your mind is saying, I'm totally okay with this breaking because now I get something fun to play with, right? Whereas a professional is looking at it going, I'm okay if things break because I have a system to solve the problem. And I'm moving on to grow and build and scale things and work with others to get to that point. I think so often in this industry, because of that lack of high quality information that is easily available, there are a lot of dabblers and people who want to be professionals in this space. They just don't know how to get there because they weren't trained to think about systems thinking or systems engineering thinking or like first principles. Pick whatever you want, whatever framework you want to talk about that gets you from not having system in process to having system in process. And they're not trained in it, which makes them normal, right? Like, they're not nerds like me where I go, great, if this, then that, if this, then that, if this, then that. Or great, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5, so that I can delegate it out, right? My job is to replace my role in everything I touch, right? Like, at some point, I should not be teaching people everything in that boot camp. I should have probably a better teacher who has the framework. They know what needs to be taught, and they're able to communicate it even better than I can, so that then I can focus on, great, how do we help all of those people coming out and scale that system So then when we're doing the when things go wrong, right? Like, and we've toyed with this, build an AI Brad so that when you put in a question, it gives you all the answers that it potentially could be, because that's how you scale that information, because it's going to be different based on location and everything else. I feel like I went off on a tangent, though. Am I still answering the question? I feel like I've
No,
made.
no, you're doing great. It brought to mind, I've right behind me, subtle plug for Buy Back Your Time. I've
I
been
like
reading
it.
through that, and one of the principles in the book talks about the 10-80-10 rule. So
Yes.
10% of talking about project management, essentially, as you're starting a business or owning
Mm-hmm.
different procedures, is that the first 10%, the ideation and the vision, is created by you, the entrepreneur.
Yep.
You have a team fulfill the middle 80%, get most of the work done, implementation, process establishment, all of that. And then before they finish it at the 90% mark, they bring it back to you for your special sprinkle of your entrepreneurial magic, whatever is most in line with what you're trying to create, so that 80% of it is done by someone on a repeatable process, and only the most important first, establishing the vision and then putting the finishing touches on it, fall to you, the entrepreneur, the business owner, the leader of that project.
So it's kind of like you're a chef, right? Like, you design the menu, you get everybody to put it out, and then on the plating, you're the one who puts a little crumble on the food. You're like, yes, chef's kiss, done, send
Exactly.
it, right?
Exactly.
That's
And
fun.
the sous chef doesn't put their name on it, right?
No, no, not at all. But that's, I mean, that's exactly right. And I think it's a challenge for people in any industry, especially when you're a founder of a company, to gradually let it go and just be okay with it, right? And know, this is where I think a lot of people, especially because we're dealing with a lot of highly technically skilled and intelligent individuals, them coming to terms with the fact that it's not going to be an A plus or 100% answer on the test, and being okay with a B answer, is really, really hard for high achievers that have never ran a company. And not only a company, but a company, again, we talked about all those different disciplines that are included, that has all of those different disciplines included. I think that piece right there, which is, again, why everybody in the ecosystem has access. We've got Michael, we've got Natalie. Those are two coaches that they're focused on, not even the mining stuff. They're focused on systems and process and mental fortitude and mindset coaching, because those are leaps that you have to get through in order to be okay with, great, I'm delegating this 5% today and I'm okay with it, right? Like, that's so hard to do. You and I talked about that, right? Early on, you're like, oh, but I got to do it because it's mine and it's got to be me who does it. And you're like, I don't have to go through the pain. Why go through the pain? You don't like doing it anyway, Bo.
It's so important to have that mindset. I like to say that if you want to get your perfectionism cured the fastest way possible, go start a business and organize a team. That's the
Mm-hmm.
way that you will let go of that tendency. And I think it's only for the better, right? If you just get in the habit of creating and building systems, that is such a more fulfilling path, and it gives you so much more headroom to actually build something worth building. Because if you are the bottleneck and everything has to be audited by you on the back end and it's got to be perfect, you're never going to grow past what you're able to personally look at on a daily basis. And we all have 24 hours.
Yes. Yeah. I think, I still struggle with it, by the way. I still struggle with this. I'm sure you do too. But I still struggle with, Brad, is it really that important if the graphic that's being created doesn't have this little thing on the back end? Because that's a visual thing for me. And I am not a graphic designer, right? I just know I like what I like and I know it works, and trying to let go of everything else, because, hey, they're going to see it a few times. Don't worry about it, right? Or when I handed over some of the newsletter responsibilities, because most of those come out from me. So, and I don't even proof them anymore. I let Natalie take care of that now. And I'm like, just read it. If it sounds like me, we're good. If it doesn't, That's fine, right? It's an email that's going to hit an inbox. They're going to see the email. They're going to open it up. They're going to read it. They may unsubscribe. It is what it is. Let it go, right? Like it's so hard for me. This is like the people pleaser in me, because everybody who sees or touches my whatever we're putting out there, like I want them to feel as if we're having a one-on-one conversation like this.
Yes.
And I can't. Like it's physically impossible. This isn't Duplicity, right? That old movie with Michael Keaton.
Yeah. Pizza.
Yep.
So we've talked about the team. I think it's clear to anybody listening that the team, none of this would exist without the people behind us, right? There's supporting industries that if it were just Brad or if it were just Bo, we could not get a major site off the ground and keep it running and keep all of our clients happy. So having a good team behind you is a key takeaway from this, I would say. One thing I want to get into with you is how you evaluate opportunities, or how you think about the expected value of a project you might get into. Because in the mining industry, we've got many different structures that we can set deals up with, right? You can self-mine, you can build a facility, soup to nuts, put your own machines in it and mine Bitcoin. You can build your own facility, you can fill it with other people's servers and they can pay you to run their equipment. You can get any middle slice out of that and just bring a particular piece of equipment and rent it. There's so many different models and so many different kind of ways to profit from this. Some of them very high risk, very high reward, and others, as stable and predictable as traditional real estate, let's say. So I'm curious how you think about evaluating opportunities.
That's actually a really good question. And I think it's also personal to who's evaluating it, right? So for us, we look at it from a couple of different standpoints. The reason the Build a Mine Bootcamp came to be is because I knew I couldn't build capacity fast enough, right? And so we built out the framework of the 6 phases of Build a Mine: planning and design, which is what you go through in the boot camp. Then it's construction, then it's launch. Then depending on the model, it's co-location or client acquisition, right? And then phase 5 is optimization. And then phase 6 is scale up to whatever else you're doing or go deploy again. And then that's really nailing down the systems of your personal framework. So I think when we evaluate opportunities on our end, I go back to one, does that opportunity, depending on what it is, tie into some of our core competencies? Do we, one, already know how to do it, right? So have we done it? We know without a doubt as to how to take somebody who's coming in and coach them through that Build a Mine framework that I just laid out. We know how to do it no matter where they are in the world. There's going to be learning things and tweaks along the way, like specifically when talking about team, there's going to be things that we're going to learn that are going to be different in different areas, right? Every power company, every power distributor, they're all different. But the framework is still essentially the same, and we keep adding high quality who's into that process to help us do it. So like that's step 1. Step 2 then is it actually going to help us be profitable or achieve some of our internal goals, right? So I look at all of those facilities that have popped up that we've helped to grow over the last now 3-4 years or so, right? And by the end of this year, we had set a goal that we wanted to help 100 facilities get up off the ground around the globe by the end of this decade. I mean, we're coming up on halfway point here quickly, which means we're probably right on track, right? It's 2024 and we've helped 40. This summer we'll be at like 47 or 48, right? And then by the end of the fall, we'll be into the 50s. So going into 25, we'll be at the halfway point, which is great, which means we're hitting exactly where we needed to be, which is awesome. So does it help us achieve that goal? Now we're looking at some other metrics like wins and feedback, and are they growing? So last week in the Microminer Club, when I was asking for wins, the other goal that's come out of it is now, hey, how much power are we actually helping to get online into this industry that now becomes a load center for whatever that area is? And I mean, by the end of this year, Bo, I mean, we've done the math. I mean, we're in the hundreds of megawatts right now, which is cool because that was not a goal at all. I was like, there's no way everybody in this program through the Build a Mine, there's no way that 10 people are going to try and shoot to get to 30, 50, 100 megawatts this quickly. And all of a sudden, you guys are coming out and going, hey, we're adding this many megawatts, we're adding this. And I was like, there's no way. And it became fun to begin to look at. And we're trying to narrow down how we can gradually track this. Because the cool part about that is that all of you, I'll say no, most people in the Microminery Club are small business owners, owner operators, right? Where essentially you're operating as if it's a small private business that's self-contained or owned by a very small group. And you're talking about, in US dollars, millions of dollars of revenue, now hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue each year. And then we began to figure out, okay, all the math that legs out behind that, how many jobs are created. Like, I really want to get in to do a study on the economic impact of how all of these micro mineries are actually impacting not only the owners, but the trickle in those communities. Like for you went into a small community, and 5-10 years from now, that small community is going to be so thankful that you came into that community, because you've helped to update the grid power, you've helped to update things through taxes, you've helped to upgrade all of this stuff that would have been non-existent, right? Totally different facility. If they hadn't come in, they were going to have the power company, just one company was going to have to fire at least one lineman, put another one on part-time. They were going to have to push back their upgrades to their distribution system, 5 to 10 years. And instead, they actually were able to go out and hire 3 more linemen. They were actually able to update the power systems, which then is helping to lower power for all those people in that community. Like, those are the things that I'm looking at. Now, my whole vision of what makes us want to dive into a project has shifted, I guess, is the story. Those basic metrics are still there and like part of what we're doing. And the profitability and the revenue, that's all part of it. And at the same point in time, it's less about that, more about the impact, right? Because I truly believe now, even more than I used to, that mining is actually the manifestation of what Bitcoin is for people who don't understand what this magic internet money is. Does that make sense? Like, we're actually taking energy that people probably wouldn't be using, that would be sent back into the ground, and turning it into something of value that's going to help the community right now, and also build this financial network beyond that I want you all to tap into. If you're a local community member, and if you're confused about what that means, come take a look at what's happening here, right? Like, so for you, Bo, I'm curious with that, are you doing any of those like studies with the city to go, great, we're up and running. Now I want to track this with you guys. Are you doing that at all?
So in a numerical sense, not yet, but I can resonate with that story of having essentially degrowth and losing linemen and having to cut resources. And that's the same scenario that our city was in, is, only about 1,000 people lived there. As the day that we turned on, we were the size of the entire utility. And before we considered coming, they had let linemen go. They were down to 0 linemen that were on contract with the city. They have to hire them from, more than an hour away. They're quite a bit more expensive because they don't have the resources, the tax base, the industry in town that will support that kind of salary. And now at our terminal growth size in that city, we're expecting that they'll be fully staffed within just a couple of years. And that's a story that, I'm excited to tell. And I think you touched on it, which is, there's so much more to evaluating these investments than just what the return figure is, how quickly you're going to ROI and how much money you're going to make, because there is a local impact component to building these sites. And it's harder to quantify, but it's so much more important in the long run that you are putting your project in a location where it's going to have a beneficial local impact.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's critical, man. I really believe there's so many cities that are struggling right now to just maintain, because they haven't figured out how to get out of the Tatwadi mindset, right? And shift into something that could actually help their city and the community reinvigorate itself, that's not a short-term thing, right? Not just sizzle, but there's actually stake to it. And I think that point of making that part of like a mission and a goal of any company that's going to deploy in those rural areas is critical to your success, right? We talk about community all the time. That's one of the things in the Build a Mind, right? Where and it's something, with Minor Mastery coming up, that's going to be even more critical moving forward, because people don't understand why policy is creating this bipolarity to choose a side when you don't have to. The point is that, hey, dropping how big is the first site, if you don't mind sharing? The Abundant
It's
Minds.
3 megawatts right now.
Yeah.
I plan to get up to 10.
So 3 megawatts you're bringing into that city. Let's just say, somewhere on, if each of those megawatts generates $1 million of revenue a year, right, at a baseline level, just for round numbers sake, that's $3 million of revenue into that city. That a major chunk of it's going to the power company, right, which creates jobs in that community. Part of that's going to taxes. Part of that's going to updating the infrastructure. Part of that's you creating jobs, which then creates energy within that community, because now you're going to go out to eat every once in a while. You're going to maybe have professional services gain another client, or whatever those numbers are. And that means a ton. Like, those people living in big urban centers, they don't get it, right? But in a city or a town of 1,000 people, if you do that in that town now, that's a major catalyzing force to uptick into everything. Just adding 5 to 10 jobs, that's huge. That seems small for most people. But increasing employment in that city by 0.1%, is that what that is? Yeah, 0.1% is huge. Mm-hmm. Because then they have kids, right? They get married, somebody else comes in. Not only that, it's a draw, right? So if you're bringing people on site, now that you're getting new people, it creates a ripple effect. And this has always been what I've seen when manufacturing has exited all these rural towns, or whether, because that was a lumber town, or the lumber industry has exited that town, that's a hit. And unfortunately, part of the challenge of working with those communities is to help them understand, no, we may not be able to replace every single job, because guess what? The world is just that more efficient in using our hours to get work done. And we are going to be able to replace it with a higher, quote unquote, a higher level position that may feel like, from an economic standpoint, you're replacing at least 2 of those jobs with one person, right? Just because of how this business or industry works. So it may not be the quantity of people, but they may make more in the long run than that one person in the lumber mill might have worked. And it's safer, right? Like, there's a whole bunch of other metrics we can dive into. Mm-hmm. That I think when these opportunities arrive for these rural communities, they need to look at it from a different perspective as, no, it's not going to replace it. We're not going to replace the blue with the blue, but it's a shade of green. And they may have to go, well, I don't really like green because I'm not used to green. But you know what? Green is better than having red, right? And so with that being in mind, maybe they can go, okay, now tell me more about this. How does this help us long term, rather than the short-sighted stuff that people always look at?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And for anyone listening to this who's thinking about setting up a mine, I came from that mindset of, I live in a town now of 100,000 people. I've lived in towns of 1 million and 10 million. And I never felt like, as an individual setting up a business, I could impact that size of community. That's a self-limiting belief that I'm working on. But by the same token, if you're out there and you've got one site that you might set up, I think the story is you can have a significant impact on, a few hundred to a couple thousand people just by setting up one of these projects in the right spot.
Yes. Yeah. And it's going to be hard, but it's not rocket science. Like, it's not a difficult business, right? There's a lot of moving parts, but you just follow the process and all of a sudden it spins out on the back end.
Mm-hmm. Well, Brad, one thing that since we're coming up at the end of the time, I always
Mhm.
love that your mental models help me frame things in the right way when I'm making investment decisions and leadership decisions and business decisions. I'm curious, you have any mindsets or mental models that you want to share with someone who's just starting to get into professional mining? Maybe they're like we were a few years ago and they're putting a significant portion of their net worth into this and they want to be sure that they're doing it right. How would you tell them to think about getting into the mining space?
I go back to the who, not how, right? I think I think this is an industry where you have to be creative because it's going through that shift of being cypherpunk to professional. And these are conversations I have often. I go, what are you good at right now? And then go and find the who may need what you already know how to do. And then you have to apply what you already know how to do to this industry. I think that's for people shifting from one professional industry into an industry that's trying to figure out how to professionalize. That's what they need to do. Those people who are just like, I want to dive in, I don't know where I can help. Again, it's the who. I'm learning. We get calls all of a sudden all the time, like, "Hey, does anybody need this type of service or thing?" And I go, you know what? Nobody does it right now. Let's put it out there and see, but don't put it out there. This is what I would say. Bitcoiners and miners don't like to be sold, right? They like to see that you're going to put in the work first, and then they're willing to help make sure that you have growth afterwards. Because this industry has gone through so many cycles before of scammers, right? So when we get called to ask based on those opportunities, because we've been called to ask to do a couple of different things recently that are really, really different, and I just want to do them because I think they'll be fun for me. Because you know me, try not to go too far off tangent, but um, being open to trying, it's that hustle and grind, right? And I know Gary Vee, everybody talks about it, but it's not just in the content, it's also in the first work. So that this industry doesn't have those standards on necessarily if you're asked to do something that's specialized, for example. Um, Prime example of this, all of these sites going up that require now water. I'll just use this as an example. Water was not part of the equation in the first 30 builds that we built. And now water's in the equation in the immersion aspect, in the hydro aspect, like all of this stuff. And finally, I think these owner operators are figuring out I can't just pull it from the tap and go, hey, the water's been treated, everything's good, because they're running into corrosion, they're running into clogging, they're running into biologics, they're running into all these issues. And I go, the scientist in my brain goes, water treatment's not a new thing, guys. You just have to ask somebody to do it. And this is why we brought in maybe Matt. Matt's somebody who has worked in that side of the industry in a different capacity for a long time. I'm like, Matt, we got sites coming on. You're dealing with water. I need you to help me. I don't know water chemistry anymore. I probably used to back in college. Probably could do it. I don't want to have to study OChem and analytical chemistry anymore. Those were some of my, I enjoyed them in college. Don't want to have to pull out the maps to figure out. I just don't want to do it. I got a C and 4 H's and an OH, like whatever. Just give me water and tell me that it's not going to corrode my stuff and cause me to have to invest a ton of money every year to change out parts. And he's like, yeah, it's easy. I said, okay, cool. There are so many sites out there that in a professional industry, if you had water issues, they wouldn't be trying to figure it out on their own. They'd pick up the phone, they'd call a water chemist place, and they'd say, solve this problem for me. We're at the point where finally people are beginning to do that with problems like that, rather than trying to be MacGyver to figure it out. That's what I'm trying to do. I don't give me a rubber band, a paperclip, and a toothpick, and I'll solve the water problem. No, it doesn't work that way anymore at scale, right? Especially because everything's getting more complicated, more computer. It's like cars. I used to be able to fix everything in my first car. I can't fix anything in the car I drive now. Too many computers in there. And I think that that's part, like if you're trying to get into this industry, understand that the miners are thinking like MacGyver. They need you. You just have to boil it down in a framework for them that they're going to understand the value that you're going to bring. And potentially what that may be is a flipped revenue model where on your first couple gigs, you're not going to collect payment until it's done and all done for your time, maybe for the parts and components, but for your time, you may have to say, I'm going to eat it to prove your worth, because all of these Bitcoin miners are going, well, I can figure it out on my own. And I think that that's something where if you're entering the space, come in, go, I'm willing to put in the time and the effort. I'm willing to give the advice and the value that you and I talked about at the beginning with the information. And then if they're willing to pay me to do the work, then I'm going to get paid. Or my favorite, which is how I've maintained in this industry, they're going to try and figure it out on their own and go do it after you give them the information, which is what happens all the time with me, or has. And 4 months later, they go, Brad, we tried it. I couldn't do it. I don't know what we did wrong. And then I ask a couple questions and like, oh, nope, we didn't do that. Oh, we didn't do that. Oh, we didn't do that. I'm like, well, now do you want my help? And they go, yes, please. I go, great. Here it is. We talked about it before. We're going to come in. Don't worry. It's not just me. I've built a network of experts. So I'm probably going to bring in this person for this part, this person, right? And I think having that network effect and understanding that it's all about the who I know and then the effort on the front end to tell them and teach them as much as I can. And they're going to want to fit. Like you did the same thing, right, Bo? You went out after the first time we talked. You're like, I'm just going to do it this way. And then you came back. Well. Yeah. And then you came back and you said, all right, let's try this. And we worked on it together and you figured out a lot of stuff on your own. And I think it was just those initial conversations that may have changed how you thought about solving the problems. And you've been able to do a lot on your own since then, which is always my hope, right? Any consulting clients or any of these clients, I want to help you get to a point and then train you to do it without me. Because if I get hit by a bus tomorrow, you need to be able to do it without me.
I love the saying, one, you should not outsource your confidence. But I think early on when you're learning something new, outsourcing the confidence and competence to someone you trust, even if you only, like we had maybe an hour a month throughout the development process. It wasn't like you were my project manager. I just needed to know somebody who's looking over my shoulder. And that's often all that we need, is someone who is watching what we do and able to point out what you're already doing and how that may not fit into what you're trying to create.
Correct. Yeah. That's a great, what was that quote again? I want to write that down.
You shouldn't outsource your confidence.
You shouldn't outsource your confidence.
You should not outsource your confidence.
Okay.
Well, Brad, we are getting to the end, and I wanted to open the floor up for you to leave us with any final thoughts that you've got, any projects that you're working on, any events that you want to point people to. Yeah. What's the value that we want to leave the audience with before we head off?
I think I'll leave it with this. If you're trying to get into mining, find somebody who's done it. Doesn't have to be me. Doesn't have to be Bo. Find somebody who's done it so you're not making the same mistakes. That's what the Microminery Club is for, right? So there's a group of people. Just work with somebody. I think the other thing to think about is that we're still very early. We're still very, very early. So regardless of what you hear about in the mainstream media or even in the non-mainstream media, it's still extremely early. This business is going to develop over the next 100 years, and I'm going to be gone, and my kids or grandkids are going to look at it and go, remember when Brad used to put the air handler, Grandpa Brad used to put the air handler doing this thing? And it's not going to look at all the same, which means that there's only that much opportunity to think about, right? I draw a picture on the whiteboard, but nobody wants to see my art. So knowing that it's that early, put in the time to study before you take action. And there's plenty of people out there who will help you with that. And if they're not, you can always reach out to me, right? That's why we're doing the Miner Mastery event in collaboration with the Bitcoin Conference coming up here this July. Go to minermastery.com. You can see all the stuff there, but there are a lot of people who want to help out of the sheer fact that they want to see this industry and Bitcoin be successful, because it does allow anybody to have freedom. And that's really the key to it. And the miners are the people behind the network, making sure that we're instilling and maintaining the freedom of those using it. So you can either be a part of that in mining, or you could just be somebody who uses it to create your own freedom, which is totally fine too. But I'm with the miners. We're the future blue collar people of this industry. So there's your wisdom to end this out. Be a miner.
What a beautiful way to close. Thank you so much, Brad. And I just want to say on the tail end of this, I'm so grateful for you coming on the show. I'm so grateful for your help in my personal journey. I'm really excited to see what you do over the next few years, knowing how many people you're already impacting behind the scenes, building out capacity, building out sites, and having serious local impacts wherever they may be. I think it's not a stretch to say that you currently have a national, maybe even global impact with what you're doing today. And so I'm excited to see what you're able to be a part of in the next couple of years, and just grateful to know you. So
Thanks,
thank you for coming on. And if people want to get in touch with you, they can email you at brad@miningwithbrad.com. And any other handoffs to Twitter, YouTube, anything else that you want people to be able to find you on?
Search Mining with Brad. That's Twitter. @Mining with Brad is our Twitter page there. We've got an event page for Miner Mastery. I think it's @Miner Mastery. The Daily Bitcoin Show, guys. I mean, if you're trying to figure this out, you can hop on Twitter every day from 8 to 10 a.m. Eastern. We run a X Spaces called the Bitcoin Daily Show there's 15 other co-hosts outside of me. So anything from Thursday's Mine, right? Energy and mining, but there's a community show. There's a content creator show with all of the favorite content creators, Seb Bunny, BTC Sessions, you name it. Wednesday is 101 Bitcoin. Friday is Bitcoin in your daily life. We've got a macro show in economics on Saturday, and we've got a philosophy show on Sunday. I am really trying really hard to make this easy for people to get into, because it's here. Now it's a matter of people choosing when they enter it. Bitcoin in general, right? And what that looks like for them. So appreciate you, Bo. Appreciate you having me on. I'm pumped, man. You've done a great job. I'm excited for you. I love observing people grow, and your growth has been extremely inspirational for me. And it verifies and validates that we're doing the right thing, especially when you have good people like you trying to execute on it, which is awesome, man. So keep it up, man. Okay?
You're doing it right, brother. Thank you so much.
Thank you.